Hey guys, Freddy with Poor Man Mods here. A couple months ago, I did a video of me tearing down my completely good, nothing wrong with 1UZFE-VVTi that I'm going to be putting into my IS300 in a couple months. In this video series, I'm going to do my best to bring you guys a step-by-step rebuild for the 1UZ. Summit Racing sent me a bunch of stuff, virtually everything that you need to rebuild the 1UZ, with the exception of the bearings, which I got from Toyota. Everything else I got from Summit Racing. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff here. So within the next couple of videos, I'm going to do a step-by-step, or as close to step-by-step as I can, for rebuilding this perfectly good 1UZ. We're going to take it all the way down to the bearings, piston rings, everything else. Pretty much the only thing that I'm not replacing is the oil pump. So with that being said, let's get the rest of this engine torn apart and start rebuilding it. And as we go along with every part that I did get from Summit Racing, I'll have the part number on the screen as well as in the description, so you can go to their website and get it for yourself. And a lot of you guys might not know that you can get all this stuff from Summit Racing. You might think it's mostly American cars, but no, they had a ton of stuff for the 1UZ, which was pretty surprising to me. So I'm super happy to be partnering with them. Definitely want to thank them for helping me out with this. And yeah, make sure you check out Summit Racing for all your 1UZ needs. And let's get on to the rebuild. When you take the crankshaft out of this engine, you can't just go to Toyota, go to a main bearing supplier and just order a set of main bearings. Apparently every engine is different. I don't know if they were like machined by hand, assembled by hand, or what have you, or if the cranks were polished by hand, but all the bearings are different. The top and bottom moons are different. So you can't just get a standard set. When you take your engine apart, you have to look at the stock bearings, and each bearing has a specific number on it, and you have to match that with the new bearings on the website. And they're very hard to see. Sometimes they're gone, and you'll have to do your best to figure it out. But I'll show you what my numbers were and my shopping experience for the bearings, and maybe it'll help you out. So taking this apart, the second time, I did all this off camera, took it apart, figured out my bearings were incorrect, but when I took the old bearings out, I laid them out in the order I removed them, so I kept track of everything. And on this piece of paper here, I wrote down my bearing sizes. So this is position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. When you go to shop for bearings, you'll find that the bearings are for position 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The 3 in the center are the same. So when shopping for these, you'll find them for position 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, and 4. And then 1 and 5 are the same. So my bearing for the front, I have written down, looked like a 4 for the top moon, and then it looked like a 6 for the bottom moon. And since this engine is upside down, what we're seeing is the bottom. So it looked like the top moon was a 4, and it looked like it was number 6. But shopping for these bearings, you could not find a pack that was 4 and 6, only a 4 and a 5. So the bearing number was super hard to read, and it looked like it could have been a 6 or a 5, but since you can't get a 4 and a 6, I'm assuming it's a 4 and a 5. And easily enough, the top and bottom moons for the 3 center positions were both 3 on top and 3 on the bottom, which made it simple. And then for the front, it was 5 and 6. So we have a 4 and a 5 bearing, a 3 and a 3, 3 and a 3, 3 and a 3, and then a 5 and a 6. And there's a ton of different options. So I think you can get like a 4 and a 4 or a 5 and a 5. But if they're different, they're usually only one number apart, such as 4, 5, and then 5 and 6. There isn't a big gap like 4 and 6. At least that's what I found. Super complicated. I don't know why it's like this. I don't know why there isn't just a standard set, but this is what I found. So currently in this engine, the incorrect bearings are installed. I will install the new bearings that I purchased and hope that they are correct. And hopefully, when I torque it down, the crank will spin. Got our new bearings now. I'm gonna leave this oil on the block right here. Some people like to install these bearings with a lubricant on the back. Keeps it for various reasons. Some people also don't like it, but I'm going to leave the oil on here. I'm not going to clean it off. And make sure that the bearing half with the holes goes on this part of the block. The part that is completely solid with no holes, that goes on the cap. Now we got some ultra sticky, ultra stringy assembly lube. We'll put some lube on each bearing and then lay the crank on. One side is completely smooth, and the other side has the grooves. The two bearing halves that do not have a tab right here go on the engine block side, and these oil grooves are going to face outward. Right here. Oh, yeah. Now we're on to the main caps. I put these in order. So when I took off the first one, I put it down. Second one, put it down, all in order. So I'm doing the reverse installation. So I kept everything in order. It has this little stamp on the front. It has this little stamp on the bottom of it, or the top, whatever you want to call it, but it points towards the front of the engine. Now we will get the bearings in them and also get the new hardware installed. So as you can see, no holes on this bearing. This goes on the cap. Dab some assembly lube on there. These were pretty difficult to get out, so this might take a tap of a hammer. I'm going to get all of them in the block, and then I'll worry about forcing them down.
Way farther down on the other side. There you go, champ. Fucking right tool for the job.
Toyota SST 10PMM29. Had to pull this cap back out to install the upper portion of this thrust bearing. Make sure that the oil grooves are facing out. Now you can drop it down in. I'll run these bolts down with my electric ratchet, and then once they kind of seat and make contact, then I'll pull out the torque wrench and do it in sequence. Bolts get tightened in two sequences. The first is 27 Newton meters, and then you're going to torque them by 90 degrees, and I'll put on the screen right here the torque sequence. And yeah, we will get started. Now that we torqued all the bolts to 27 Newton meters, we now have to torque them 90 degrees. And I have this magical, I don't know how it works, but this tells you digitally degrees. Blows my mind how it works, but the manual says it's a very simple way of checking 90 degrees. Get a paint marker, clear the oil off these bolts, get a paint marker and mark the bolt in the cap, and then rotate it until it's 90 degrees out. But I'm gonna use this digital torque wrench. And we're gonna do the same order that we did the torquing to the 27 Newton meters. So there we have it. This is set up to 90 degrees. Don't know how it knows, but somehow it knows. Let's see how accurate it is. That seemed pretty accurate to me. Okay, now that we have the main caps torqued down on the bottom, we can go on the side and install the 10 main cap bolts from the side. I went ahead and put new O-ring washers on these. My old ones were extremely brittle, so if you're rebuilding this engine, it's probably a worthwhile investment to replace these O-rings, but maybe you don't need to, I don't know. But I took the extra insurance and got a new set of O-ring washers for these bolts. So now we'll get them all in, and you torque them to 36 foot-pounds. There is no particular torque sequence. Okay, got these 5 torqued. Now go ahead, flip the engine over to the 5 on the other side of the engine, and then you can move on to installing the pistons and rods. I already did one off camera, but this is where things start to get really weird with this engine. This is a late model, I guess you could say, 1UZ. It's the VVTi, and Toyota changed some things in this engine, and not many people know about it. Like, the aftermarkets don't know about it, and I think some people at Toyota don't know about it, but they changed the thickness of the ringland on these pistons. For the later model 1UZs, they went to a thinner ringland on the piston. I believe the older generation 1UZs are 1.5 millimeter, and these are 1.3 millimeter piston rings. So if you go to Summit Racing or the dealership, or you try to find piston rings for a 1999 1UZ like I have here, the piston rings that you're going to get will not fit the pistons. You'll either have to change pistons or get the right piston rings, which through some research I found the right piston rings for this engine. Here are the piston rings that I got from Summit Racing that will work for this application. So these piston rings are actually for a V6 Camry engine, but they're the correct dimensions for these pistons. And since they're for a V6 engine, you either have to get a set of 6 and then 2 individuals, or 2 sets of 6, and that's what I did in this situation. So they work, they are the right dimensions and everything, but they're just for a V6. I'm not sure why some of the aftermarkets weren't updated about this change from Toyota, and even if you go to Toyota, they have the piston rings for this particular engine discontinued. You can't get them, but you can get the ones for the Camry. Now, I just think the part number for the box of 8 is discontinued. They're still making them because this is basically the same piston ring. It's just a set of 6 and not 8. So this is what you'll have to get if you plan on changing the piston rings in your late model 1UZ. Now that we know about that, we're going to check the ring gap for the piston rings. Certainly you want to do that because, you know, even though I trust these piston rings that I got because they're for a different engine, we're certainly going to check the ring gap. On this piston, the top ring gap was perfect. The second ring was a little tight and we needed to adjust it. So I'm going to show you how to check ring gap on this cylinder here. And then once we figure it out, I'll just get the rest of the pistons installed. You don't need to see me install all 8. So I'll show you how to do this one cylinder and then apply that to the rest. So when you get these piston rings, you're going to get a baggie for one of the rings that says the top ring. Pretty self-explanatory. And then another baggie for the second ring down. And then 2 baggies that are labeled 3. One of them will be the third set of rings, and there will be 2 of them for that groove, and the other is the oil ring. You only need to check the piston ring gap for the first and second ring, and I'll show you how to do that. To do this, you're either going to need a special tool to replicate a piston, have a spare piston, or just take the rings off. of the piston that you're going to check. So what we're doing is checking the rings for a cylinder, and then we're going to put those rings on that piston. You need everything to match. So the rings that we're going to check them on cylinder 6. I actually grabbed the wrong piston. I caught myself. We're going to check it on cylinder 6 and then install them on the cylinder 6 piston and make sure that's where it goes. So I have piston 6 here. I'm going to remove the factory rings, even though these are probably good. I pretty much took this engine apart for no good reason. Probably letting the Toyota magic out of it, but we're going to replace these rings. Now that you have a bare piston with no rings, you can use this to check the piston ring gap. But now that you have it out and no rings, I'd recommend going in here at least with a brush and cleaning out as much carbon gunk as you can. Another very important thing to note about the pistons on this engine, or probably most V engines, this piston right here is labeled R right here. All the pistons on this side are labeled R, and these are labeled L because of the way the valves are. You have different cutouts on the piston. If you put this on the other side, you'll likely have interference and damage your engine. So you need to make sure that you're putting these pistons in the right location, and that's why I ended up numbering these. We're going to check the ring gap of the number 1 or the top ring first, and very small right here it says top. So you want to check this in the right orientation. You want this facing up. That's how it will be installed on the piston. We're going to get that in the cylinder here. Then you're going to take your ringless piston, push down on the piston ring to try to make it as square as possible in the cylinder. You want it as square in the cylinder as you can, just like that. Now, according to the factory service manual, the correct piston ring gap for this top ring is 0.25 millimeters to 0.45 millimeters. And most feeler gauge sets are going to have readings in millimeters and inches. Now, with piston ring gap, you certainly don't want it too tight. If the ring gap is too tight, so say if it's 0.20 when the spec is 0.25 or larger, if it's 0.20, the ring can get pinched together and blow a ringland. And that's what happens a lot with nitrous cars, so you do not want a tight ring gap. If the ring gap is bigger than spec, that's better than it being too tight, but if you have too big of a gap, you're going to have blow-by and performance issues and burning oil. So you want it within spec, but it's better to have it slightly too big than slightly too small. And if the gap is too small, we're going to file it. Since the minimum gap is 0.25 millimeters, I have a 0.254 millimeter feeler gauge here, and you're going to put it in between the gap of the piston, and it fits in there beautifully. So we at least aren't too tight on this one. Now, like I said, on this piston here, the top ring was perfect, but the bottom ring, or ring number 2, I did have to file. So now we're going to go to the upper end of the spectrum, 0.45 millimeter, and see how that fits. That does not fit in there, does not fit in between the gap, so we are within spec for this top ring. We can set it aside and move on to the second ring. For ring number 2, instead of it saying top over here, there's a dot on this side indicating the dot goes on the left facing up, and that's how we will install it into the cylinder. Get it as square as possible. Now the ring gap specification for ring number 2 is 0.5 millimeters to 0.7 millimeters. So I already have my 0.45 millimeter feeler gauge out. We'll see if it fits. And it is snug. So we are going to have to file this a little bit, but I will confirm with a 0.50 feeler gauge, and does not fit. So we are going to file this. This is not the proper tool, but this is what I used. I used a regular file to file these rings. Summit Racing does have the proper tool to file piston rings, which I recommend you get, but this is Poor Man Mods, and I'm using a file. So we're going to file this a little bit at a time to make the gap just within spec. Alrighty. Got that gap feeling pretty good. The 0.55 millimeter fits in there pretty nice. I'll just make sure it's not too big. We'll go all the way up to 0.6. That's the biggest one I have. Oh, it fits in there like butter. Now this oil ring right here, if you notice the end of it, where the two ends of this ring meet, you want them both pointing up to the top of the piston, not pointing down. So that little tip right at the end, you want both of them pointing up. It's going to go on the piston just like this. Then you have these two very thin rings. One's going to go on bottom and on top of that oil ring. You want the gap to be an inch to the left and then an inch to the right of where the end of this oil ring meets. The bottom ring is offset over here about an inch, and the top ring is over here about an inch from the center of the oil ring. Now we'll get this second ring installed. Make sure the dot of this piston ring is on the left, and that's going to be facing up. And they specifically say not to spiral these onto the piston. You want to use a ring spreader. I don't have that, so I'm just going to do my best to spread them. I'm going to try to have the ring gap of the second ring and the first ring 180 degrees from each other. So the one has a gap over here, the other I'll make the gap over here. This top ring says top on it, so we're going to want that over here. All right, cool. Got all the rings installed in this piston. Now let's get it in the hole, this hole. We will be using this generic style piston ring compressor. We're going to slide it completely over the piston and rings. And one little tip when using this, you push this button down or this tab to unloosen it, but put your tool on it, push down, and then slowly let it rotate open. If you don't put this tool on here and you hit this, it'll just spring open and make a mess. All right, get it over the rings and then make this baby as tight as you can. Get the piston started into the cylinder. Get this real tight. This style works, but it's not the best. Now, you're gonna push on this tool pretty hard against the block. If you don't, when you push the piston down, the rings will just spring out. So push down on it really good. And then you're going to take a hammer like this, a wooden handle, something soft, not metal, and you're going to tap the piston down in pretty quickly. Success! Got it! This one took a lot of tries. And she's in. Sweet. On to the next one. Got all the pistons on the right side of the engine installed. And now I'm going to flip it over and put the rod bearings and caps on these rods, and then we'll work on the other side. Here's the main caps that I took off in order. So since we're only going to be doing the right side of the engine, we're going to be taking every other one off of here. 8, 6, 4, and 2. And I also have new rod bolts to go along with the new bearings. Dab a little oil on your new bolts, make them nice and lubricated. Only have one bolt in this connecting rod. I think we'll move on to cylinder 2 here. And yeah, no particular order. You know, there's no order to the service manual. I'm just going in the order of what I can do. And this looks like the next best one to do. And then I can hopefully rotate the crank to, you know, get this one into the right position. All right, got these 4 installed. They're not torqued down, I just have the bolts in, but now I can rotate the motor, and I think we can go ahead with installing the other 4 pistons and rods. As you can see, it rotates rather nicely. Now we're looking at it from the bottom, but the left side pistons and rods, you have the little boss on this cap facing the front, but on the right side pistons and rods, the boss is facing the rear of the engine, this little guy right here. So we have everything lined up, have the caps on with the new rod bolts that are oiled. We can now torque them to 18 foot-pounds and then 90 degrees. You want to torque these down evenly, so you don't want to, leave one loose and do 18 foot-pounds. Get these tightened down evenly, so I'll get these tightened down by hand pretty evenly, and then I will torque them. So I got both of these to 9 foot-pounds. Now I'll take them both to 18. All right, pretty simple process. Get them all torqued to 18 foot-pounds, and then we'll go back down the line and do all of them to plus 90 degrees. All right, got these torqued to 18 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and do 90 degrees to the rest of them. I have a whole kit here that I got from Summit Racing. For some reason, it's called a conversion gasket set. I'm not sure why they use the word conversion, but it's basically like the oiling system gasket kit. Comes with a bunch of stuff. I'll read off the list here. Comes with a gasket for the water inlet bypass tube, the oil pan drain plug, the oil pump inlet tube, the oil pump seal, the rear main seal, and some RTV. So what we're going to be installing right now is the oil pump seal, and also this little O-ring that goes here on the oil pump and the engine block, and you can use this RTV for the oil pump when you made it to the engine block. So I'm going to put this stuff back in the box and just worry about the seal going back on here. All right, I'm going to add a little bit of oil to the seal just to make it easier to install. We'll use our seal driving tool to install it. Perfect. All right, we're going to get this mating surface prepped for the oil pump installation. There was some silicone on here, so scraped most of it off, and using a brass wire brush to make it nice and clean. And then we're going to put a big bead of silicone around here, and also the new O-ring that goes in there. All right, use the RTV that came with the gasket kit and put it all around the oil pump here. We'll go ahead and put this on. There we go. Oh, the seal popped out. I guess we'll fix that later. I have this scrap piece of exhaust pipe that I put duct tape around the end that looks like a good fit to tap this seal back in. Yes. Worked absolutely perfect. Now onto the rear main seal. Now you're going to want to replace this O-ring. This O-ring does not come in that conversion kit. You only get one O-ring, so you will have to purchase the second one separately. It is the same O-ring in the back as it is the front, so you can use the one in that conversion kit for whichever side of the engine, but you will only get one in the conversion kit, so you'll have to purchase a second one, or go in your O-ring bin and find the right one if you have one. Now we can install this. And from the conversion gasket set, we're going to put a new gasket here for the oil pickup. Now we're going to silicone the heck out of this engine block before we put on the lower oil pan. Next is going to be this oil strainer plate thing. The conversion kit also comes with this cork oil pan gasket. You can choose to use this gasket or RTV silicone. The factory uses silicone, but since this came with the kit, I figured I might as well use it. Once again, make sure that your surfaces are super duper clean. Next thing we're going to be installing onto this block is the water pump. I got this ASIN timing belt and water pump kit from Summit Racing also. Comes with everything that you need for, you know, the whole timing set. So all the timing components, the water pump and the gasket. So at this point, we're just going to put the gasket and water pump on the engine block. This kit even comes with a few new bolts and some O-rings. I'm not sure what the O-rings are for yet, but the new hardware is nice for this. The small O-ring that came in this water pump kit is for the water pipe that connects to the back of the water pump. So we'll get this really old one off and put the new one on and put the pipe in the back of the pump. I don't have any proper O-ring lube on me, so in good old fashion, I just spit on it. And from the ASIN timing kit, we will install our new idler pulley. I got a little ahead of myself, and the timing kit comes with a new tensioner pulley already on the arm, so I can take my old one back off. Just need to swap over the bolt that goes through it and also the washer on the back. Sweet. The timing kit also comes with a new tensioner with a grenade pin installed. We're going to put this in now, but do not pull the pin until you have the belt on and everything is timed up. All right, that basically concludes the bottom end assembly of this engine. I did take my starter to get rebuilt because I do not want to have to replace it once it's in the car. It's located underneath the intake manifold, and I've got a place around here that can rebuild it for pretty cheap, so that's where it's going. And yeah, that concludes the lower end rebuild. And in the next video, whenever that comes out, we'll be working on the top end. So big thanks to Summit Racing for helping us out this video series. It would not be possible without them. And yes, you can get parts for your import and even engine parts from Summit Racing. So whatever project you have, check out summitracing.com. They probably have what you need. See you guys in the next episode of this engine rebuild series.